So, good afternoon, dear ladies and gentlemen. Elena, very good to see you. Thank you very much for joining us. My pleasure to introduce you to our guests, Elena Rame, an art historian from province of Navarra in Italy, or province, well, region of Navarra in province of Lombardy, or vice versa. She has great knowledge and great experience, impeccable English, and we'll just looking very anxiously to hear what you have to show and share with us this fine day. Thank you very much for everyone for attendance, and of course, thank you, Elena, for agreeing to spend your time and knowledge with us.
Thank you for joining us, and thank you for inviting me, most of all. So I'm broadcasting, so to say, live from Nevada, which is quite a small city, not too big of a city in northwestern Italy. And I got the chance to meet Ilya a few years ago on a very specific special tour, and we really started corresponding. So I was really happy when he asked me to talk about a topic that had to do with art history. We chose a topic that is quite broad and quite difficult in a way. So it's nativities in art history, throughout art history. So of course, the nativity alongside the crucifixion, those are the two most common scenes you will find in Christian art. So it's, I was kind of thinking about the examples I could give you today. And what I ended up doing, and you will see, is basically choosing a selection of images that will give you some knowledge of the iconography. So the symbols and the most common ways in which nativities are shown, are depicted. So of course, this is a topic, a subject that started being shown, depicted, sculpted in early Christian times. So you will see the last image I chose dates back to 1941, just to give you the idea of how long these images have been around. And of course, these images were deeply influenced by their epoch. So what I'm going to try to give you is, as I said, a few tools, a few instruments to figure out what the choices were when it comes to iconography and why those choices were made. So the first, I will be sharing some pictures. The first pictures I chose as sort of a cover to our meeting is a very popular image that is by a medieval painter, Giotto, and that is a bit of an icon of nativities. This, what you see here, is a detail that comes from a very important, a very prominent, a fundamental set of frescoes, a cycle of frescoes that was painted by Giotto in the very first years of the 1300s in Padua. So there's a chapel that was a private one. It was financed by a local family, the Scrovegnis, and basically Giotto, who was Italy's most prominent master for the 1300s, basically gave his interpretation of nativity. A nativity, what you see here is a trademark, very reoccurring element in Giotto's art, which is feelings, emotions. This was not always so. Even maternity, even a thing that today is basically fundamentally shown as heartfelt and with a lot of involvement, was not always depicted in such a way. So what you see here, the detail I chose, is really an image that not only introduces you to a master of 14th century art, Western art, but also shows you a choice he deliberately made in showing a mother being such. So as you see the mother going towards her child, Jesus here is shown in a very typical attire, you would say. So the child, and you will see it in early Christian art, is usually shown in swaddling clothes, but most of the time in earlier representations, Mary is kind of distant from Jesus. And that's also, and I will tell you, I will show an example, that's also quite interesting when it comes to anthropology and social history, because of course, throughout the Middle Ages and in early modern era, it was very common for children to die right after being born. So it was very, the rate of children dying very young was very high. And most of the time, what you see, even in the early 1400s and, in Renaissance times, in early Renaissance times, is the mother kind of being distant from her child. And that was a way that actual mothers could relate to, because it was common, as a prominent art historian once told me, not to invest. He used this word, invest too many feelings into the very first days, because those were tricky, difficult times for the child, and it was very common for children to pass away. So this is what you are going to see. Not only has a theological implications, but you have to think of these images, place them into a broader spectrum, which is society, the society they were made for. So the eyes that were looking, the spectators that were looking into at those images and could relate to those images. That is fundamental. And that is why art historians like me should always work alongside historians, not to lose touch with reality and get a proper reading of the image. So just to end the little bits and pieces I told you about Giotto and the picture you see here. So feelings, emotions, love, but also, as I said, traditional, very long-lived elements such as the swaddling clothes baby Jesus is wearing, and also the ox and the ass that stand next to the manger. So these elements already existed in early Christian times. And so for nativity scenes, we have very, very early examples, which I'm going to show you, that really tell us of a very long and, let's say, very elaborate tradition that has to do with nativity scenes. So probably the earliest example we have of a nativity scene can be found in Rome, in the catacombs of Priscilla, the Priscilla catacombs. And in this case, what you see here is Mary. Of course, there is a detail of Mary and baby Jesus. Very beautiful detail. They're sitting under a tree, as you see. So this is the typical style you get in early Christian frescoes and catacombs. So it was these examples of underground burial sites that were often decorated with very early examples of evangelical Christian scenes. So in this case, there is Mary holding Jesus, and there is a star which can be seen above their heads, and there is a guy standing next to them, and one would assume is Joseph, but that's not him. Joseph almost never plays a crucial role, and this is kind of a curse for him in a way. I will show you one of the few early examples where he's actually interacting, playing an active role. But in the first examples of nativity scenes, of course, the scene stealers are Mary, the child, and in this case, we have a prophet, Balaam, who is pointing to a star. So in this case, there is a very intricate theological reference to Balaam, who basically said, a star shall rise out of Jacob, and a scepter shall spring up from Israel. So this is basically a reference, a theological reference, given as a counterpart to the maternity scene with Mary and Jesus. So that's the prophet who basically mentioned the birth of Jesus and mentioned a star, so a scepter as in a kid, as of course the king of Israel, and he's pointing, as you see, he has his index finger pointing to the star that he mentioned in his writings. So basically, this very early, probably the earliest known nativity scene, dates back to the 4th century, and can be also combined with other. So this is a fresco. It was painted on the walls of a catacomb in Rome, but it can also, the same scene, the same choices in a way of depicting the nativity can be found in very early 4th century sarcophagi. So we have two very fine examples. So it was, of course, sarcophagi were the coffins in early Christian times, and we do really have very early examples. You can see here, so I chose two among the finest. This is the so-called Crispina sarcophagus. They usually take their name from the person who was buried in them. In this case, the Crispina sarcophagus shows how the nativity scene, as you can see here, sometimes can be combined with the adoration of the Magi. So usually you have one or the other, but it's not necessarily true that in early Christian time one was exclusive. Sometimes, especially in very intricate works of art, such as sculptures or in sarcophagi, the two images can really be combined. So in this case, what you see is an image which shows you. So in this case, we're still seeing an artifact that dates back to the 4th century, early 4th century, surely first half of the 4th century AD. And basically what you see is an image which is very close to the image we have in our heads today of the nativity or the creche. So there's a barn-like stable. So we're going to see that at one point the gospel says Mary put her child in a manger because there was no more place for Joseph, Mary, and their baby at the inn. So basically they go from Nazareth to Bethlehem for the census of the Roman Empire, and they basically end up, so Mary ends up putting baby Jesus in the manger in a stable. So this looks unbelievably modern. So I told you first half of the 4th century. And as you can see, we have images which we can find throughout the history of nativities. So the manger, which is in this case shown as a basket, sculpted as a basket, a barn-like stable, and of course the ox and the ass, which also have a practical reason. So I will tell you, not only they are mentioned in the Gospels, but they also provide heating, so to say, to baby Jesus with their breath. So that's a very human and touching image that you have of the two animals heating the stable where baby Jesus is resting. So this is one of the two parts I wanted to show you, the same sarcophagus. The other one is really a combination. You're going to see it sits in the same part of the artifact, and what you see here is the adoration of the Magi with a more, let's say, official presentation of Mary and her child sitting on her lap. So what you see here is really a combination. So the two episodes are woven together in the same artifact. And we have two elements, which on one hand are the shepherds, on the other hand are the magi. And each one of those two sets of people represent a different element. So the shepherds are basically a symbol of the Jewish people, of the Jews. Well, the wise men, the magi, represent the Gentiles, so to say, the remaining part of the world which is not Jew. So you have a combination of child's manifestation being shown, being shown, being part of two different set of peoples, so you Jews and non-Jews. So usually, of course, these, and I will tell you later, these are all scenes that were taken from the Gospels, and for some parts from the Apocrypha. So to say, so the Apocrypha are basically body of writings which were not included in the official Gospels. And they usually have a very bright, witty, and kind of a novel-like narrative, which provides plot twists and interesting elements to more, let's say, traditional takes that you will find in the gospel. So you will find the two elements being combined quite often. So, but what you do notice here, so the Virgin is sitting on throne, and you will see the first version of the Nativity, which came to be, as I told you, in the 4th, 5th century. So these versions show the Virgin Mary being basically seated, relaxed. So the emphasis is put on a painless birth, on a very relaxed situation, so not very close to reality, I would say. And so you have a reference to incarnation. So of course, having Christ having an earthly body, but also, and this is fundamental, in 431, one of the dogmas that was basically decided and made official was that the Virgin had a role as Theotokos, that is to say in Greek, the God bearer. So that very relaxed and effortless image you have of the Virgin has to do with this very special role that she was assigned starting in 431 as well. So this is, as you see, a combination of very interesting theological elements all woven together and used to tell the nativity, so Christ's coming into the world. Another very interesting sarcophagus, and this is the last one I will be showing you for today, for just to give you an idea of how early Christian art can be so unexpectedly close to our way of seeing things, is this image. So this is the first one I showed you was a sarcophagus that is now kept in Rome. This one is kept in Syracuse in Sicily. Art historians believe it dates back to sometime around 330 AD. And what you see here is, once again, a very beautiful image of baby Jesus in swaddling clothes, the ox and the ass, and you have shepherds as well. So as I told you, the news of the recipients of the news of the birth of Jesus are always these two sets of people. So it's either shepherds who symbolize Jews, or the magi, the wise men, who symbolize the Gentiles, so the Jewish part of the world. So this first version that emphasized the incarnation was later combined with a different version, which was basically based on Luke's gospel. So in many cases, so in these images that basically take the elements mentioned in Luke's gospel. So the first one had to do with Matthew. In this case, we're going to Luke. Basically, you have no Magi, no shepherds, but it's a more simplified version. So for some time, these two versions interact and are combined. But there is a new version then of the Nativity, which came into being in the 6th century and was elaborated, was let's say thought of and conceived in Palestine. So in this case, you really have a very deep influence of Eastern art, of Byzantine art. And what you do see here is a new setting, which is a cave. So what I chose, I know Ilya quite well, so I have, let's say, a passion for Renaissance art, but I thought it was going to be torture if I only put Renaissance art. So I decided to kind of choose more medieval, early Christian and medieval examples that show you this new, let's say, language that came into being, a new lexicon that was conceived in Palestine. So, of course, the images that are conceived in Palestine have a very strong bond, find inspiration in Eastern tradition. So it comes as no surprise that an iconography, which is very, very Byzantine, such as this one, can be found in Sicily. So we have Italy is really a melting pot of very different cultures. What you do find in Sicily in the 12th century is a very deep influence of Byzantine art, because at this time Sicily was under the Norman rule. And in this case, what the image I'm showing you is in Palermo, and it's a mosaic that can be found in the Palatine Chapel. So a chapel that, of course, as the name suggests, was set up for one of the Norman conquerors. And it's presently included, so in 2015 it was included in the UNESCO World Heritage Site, but probably if I hadn't told you about its location, where it's located, you would probably assume, and it would make sense if you did, that this is a mosaic that can be found in Constantinople, in some Eastern European basilica. But of course, this, as I said, there is historical connections that kind of, we had this very strong wave of Byzantine influence that involves big and crucial parts of Italy, such as Sicily. But what I wanted to show you here, this image, is a whole new setting. So we don't have the stable anymore. In this case, we have a cave. So we do have lit theological references, of course, to the cave. So basically, the cave is found. The reference to the cave can be found in writings by Justin Martyr and Isaiah, saying the prophet, saying that the Messiah shall dwell in the lofty cave of the strong rock. So once again, we have an iconography that is conceived, as I said, in Palestine, can be found in Syria, but of course that has roots in theological writings. And in this case, so you have this cave setting in many early images, and it will be basically a trademark, a very reoccurring element in Eastern images, such as Russian icons, and of course it will be popular throughout the centuries. So here, so we have this element, and what you see is also different way of depicting Mary. Mary's not, so she's not sitting relaxed, she's on a mattress, she's lying on a mattress. So birth is not painless, she's more human, she's not she knows what pain is, she knows what labor is, and she's holding her child. So there's elements of humanity being placed into this image. Joseph finally takes his usual place. He's kind of like, he usually has a cameo inside the story. He's not really, as I said, the scene stealer. He's sitting outside the cave. As it often goes, the nativity is combined with other scenes. So the Magi following of course, the wise men spotting and following the star. And then you have another element. So you have the midwives. So as you see, it's a combination of different. So the Magi end up reaching and adoring the child. And the midwives are bathing baby Jesus. So in this case, too, imagine a holy episode, a sacred story being placed into everyday life. So it was common for midwives. So see, one of the midwives is testing, like you would do even today with a newborn. You test the temperature of the water, and so did the midwife. So a sacred scene is placed into everyday life. So more and more, the images look as let's say something you could actually see in real life, and that was done because, of course, the spectator could relate to what was being told. So this is something that has this method, so to say, this strategy has been the longest, I think, living strategy in the Western and in art history and art in general. So as a spectator, if you can relate to what's being shown, especially in religious stories and sacred stories, the message is easier, let's say it's easier to understand and easier to memorize. And this is the same, it's not only Counter-Reformation art, it's not only monks in the medieval epochs. This is true throughout art history. So you're trying to find a connection to your life, so to the spectator's life, everyday life. And this is, I think, an image that's especially beautiful in many different ways. And of course, this I'm sure Ilya will be very happy to see this. So I spoke about Byzantine art, and of course, Byzantine art was also a very had a very deep influence in Northern Italian art as well. This is these are frescoes that you see here, where you have once again the Virgin in the same pose, let's say, in the same situation as in Palermo, but here we're on the opposite side of the peninsula. We're in northern Italy, a few kilometers away from my house in Lombardy, near Varese. There was a very mysterious place in some ways. So a church that still hosts a very concrete and important trace of Byzantine influence. And these are frescoes that date back to sometime between 850 and 950. Very hard to give a specific date. Historians are still fighting, quarreling over the actual date these were painted on. But what you see, once again, as I told you, typically Eastern image of the cave. You kind of see the rocks here and the Virgin on a mattress after birth. So this is the new image that swept through Europe, starting out from Palestine through Syria and eventually reaching Sicily, and in even earlier times, northern Lombardy. So as you can see, there is a constant connection between East and West. So these elements of the, let's say, other characters taking part to the Nativity are also evident in sculptures such as the one I chose to show you tonight. In this case, we have an image of a part of a door. It's a door of a church in Pisa. So if you happen to come to Italy to visit Pisa and see the Leaning Tower, just go to the Duomo as well, visit the Duomo as well. And in this case, the door dates back to 1190, about let's say to sometime around 1190. The artist is Bonanno Pizano, so a local, Pisano as to say from Pisa. And what you see here is the image. So once again, the cave, and a combination of different elements. So we still have the midwives. These, I think if you isolate those midwives, some elements of this medieval sculpture really look 20th century. I mean, look at the animals. They even look like Native American sculptures in some ways. They're very, very modern, but as I said, about 1190 circa. So midwives, baby Jesus with the ox and the ass, and Mary and Joseph, who are basically exhausted. So Mary is not only not sitting and looking relaxed and in perfect shape, she's sleeping because she's totally exhausted. And even Joseph, as you can see, he doesn't look very relaxed, or he's taking a nap basically. So very, very human elements. And then you have this beautiful cave, which is rendered as an arch. And then you have the shepherds and the angels. So the oldest shepherd, look at even the psychology and the gestures. So the older of the two, the oldest of the two, stopped playing his instrument to listen to the angel, to what the angel has to say, has to announce, while the younger shepherd, so you can even see the outfits, how important they are to get an idea, have like an image of the outfits people would be wearing around 1190. So and as I said, the younger shepherd is still playing his bagpipe. So that's what we call a piva, which is a single chantered bagpipe, which then became so to say, a constant element in nativity scenes. Even nowadays, if you were to travel to Naples, there is a whole street devoted to the craftsmen who make nativity scenes. And one of the reoccurring elements will be the bagpipe, and you still see it here. So very interesting, even when it comes to the history of a costume and musical instruments. So still the same iconography. Then at one point in history, we get different elements. especially in the late 14th century, we can witness a very deep renovation that has to do, once again, with theological sources, that has to do with really visions and new takes on theology, which came about between the 1300s and early 1400s. So in this case, what you see here is a painting that today is in Belgrade. It was painted by, it's an altarpiece, painted by a very prominent Venetian painter from the 1300s. And in this case, this is a clear depiction of a whole new way of telling the story. So we have elements which we already encountered. So you have the cave. In this case, there is a combination of cave and the stable. You get both. You get the manger, which is kind of a sarcophagus. So it's kind of sculpted. As you can see, it's not a basket anymore, but the idea is having a manger. The shepherds. For once, Joseph is interacting. So this is an element of modernity as well. So he's basically pointing to his son. He's showing the shepherds his son. And he's basically, in this case, an interpret, so to say. So he's playing a new role, not only as a bystander, but as the interpret of Jesus's divine nature. And he's basically being let's say, a connection between the divine and the an earthly life, so the shepherds. But what you see here, the very new element, is the Nativity being depicted as an adoration. So basically, this came with Saint Brigida Saint Bridget of Sweden, who was a very influential 14th century mystic who had a vision while she was a pilgrim in the Holy Land. So in Bethlehem, to this day, there is still the cave, who has been worshipped since the 2nd century AD as the birthplace of Jesus. That's why the iconography of the cave came about, was conceived in Palestine. There's an actual place. So there's an actual physical place that is believed to be Jesus's birthplace. And Saint Bridget of Sweden had a vision of Mary giving birth miraculously to Jesus while praying and then adoring the child. So in the late 14th century, thanks to Bridget of Sweden, you have this new take on the sacred episode. So this is Palo Veniciano. There's more examples. I just chose one more just to give you an idea. So it's basically Mary, Joseph adoring the child. So this is, as you can see, once again, this is Niccolò di Tommaso, another Italian painter from the second half of the 14th century. So once again, very, very interesting combination of local and Byzantine art with these angels. And then you get Mary and Joseph adoring the baby, the child, who's usually in some versions, it's more and more common, especially during the Renaissance, to have baby Jesus on the ground or on some hay, on a haystack. So there's a very deep revolution that takes place in the late 14th century. And that this choice, iconography-wise, is basically a choice that will last well into the modern, let's say into the Renaissance. And you get this beautiful example. So I just chose a very prominent, very beautiful example of a very prominent Renaissance painter from central Italy, from Tuscany. His name was Piero della Francesca. This is a work of art that you will find in London at the National Gallery. Nowadays it's kept there. But you see, this is the typical, very, let's say, innovative image that was conceived thanks to the vision of Bridget of Sweden. And you see there is Mary adoring the child. In this case, so the ox and the ass are still there. There's a beautiful Flemish-like painting in the backdrop. Joseph is always depicted as being much older than Mary. He's kind of a bystander in this case too, not actually taking part, I'm sorry, in the action. And there's a beautiful concert of music making angels. And in this case, what I wanted to show you was an element which is, once again, yes, the stable, the barn-like stable, but in this case, it's run down, it's in ruins. And this choice of having ruins in the background is typical of Renaissance nativities. And this, of course, is a choice that is made deliberately. And there is a more, let's say, a deeper meaning, a more intellectual, theological meaning. I chose another painting to show you. So there is always run down. So this is a painting by a painter whose name is Hans Baldung. He's from, of course, Central Europe, German. And what you see here is well, first of all, it's a night scene. This is typical of especially Flemish and Northern European art. So the Flemish painters were the first ones who conceived scenes taking place, episodes being set in the nighttime. So, and of course, this is also to show their ability to depict light effects. If you notice how there's Jesus who's basically giving light to those angels and to his parents. And this once again is an adoration with the traditional elements, Saint Bridget once again, but I told you there is an emphasis which is placed on the ruins. So you either have, this is like a sort of a classical building. You can have ruins of temples, ruins of churches. And so we have, so the setting of a stable which rests on good authority, which is the of course the prophets and the Gospel of Luke. But what you see here is so a trope, that is to say the trope that has to do with the buildings in ruins or churches or temples in ruins has to do, so it's nothing biblical or historical, it has to do with the golden legend. So one of the sources for especially lives of the saints is the so-called golden legend, Legenda Aurea, which tells an episode which took place. So there is an account of the collapse of the Temple of Peace when at the same moment of the Nativity. So a pagan building that collapses during the Nativity marks the end of the pagan era, of the pagan beliefs, and the beginning of a new era. So there is, of course, an emphasis placed on the difference between the new era and classical culture and religion. So, of course, these images, the images I showed you, so Hans Baldung, so Piero della Francesca, the music making angels dates back to about 1470, to the year 1470. Hans Baldung, what you see here, is around 1520. So you can see how the adoration, so the adoration of the child by Mary and Joseph, not only by the shepherds or the Magi, is really a very, very long-lived iconography that started in the late 1300s. But of course, these images change deeply with the Counter-Reformation. So of course, there was a big earthquake, so to say, in Christian culture. And for Catholics, it was especially shocking when Luther separated from the church, from the Vatican. And when you had the Reformation, eventually the Catholic Church tried to come up with a solution by organizing a council in the city of Trent in northern Italy. And basically a whole session of this council was dedicated to the use of images and to the qualities and elements these images had to have. So of course, in a time of emergency, everything became very strict. And in later images, so during the second half of the 1500s, you will no longer find elements such as the midwives, because of course, in the new, very strict and kind of uptight take on religion, let's say on defending Catholic religion from heresy coming from Central Europe, of course, anything that was kind of too ordinary or apocryphal, such as the midwives bathing the child, was basically deleted, eliminated from any scene. So you have to keep in mind, of course, of these historical facts that really shake our images. Shake our culture, our visual culture from its very base. And of course, this is something that we really find, especially in the late 1500s, early 1600s, where the dogmas, when the dogmas of the Council of Trent were much more felt and let's say strict. So of course, I knew it was gonna take me some time, and I had to kind of show you. Let's say I had many images in mind. One of the last ones I wanted to show you was Caravaggio. So, of course, the iconography of the Nativity. In this case, this work of art, I cannot tell you where it's currently kept. Unfortunately, this is an adoration, a nativity with an adoration as well, a very intricate image that combines, as I told you, two different elements woven together. So in this case, we are in the early 1600s. Caravaggio is, of course, one of the best known painters of Italian art history. He had a very irregular and crazy life. He was convicted with murder. So there's plenty of lawsuits against him. He fled Rome after murdering a man. So a very novel-like or movie-like life. And some of his works have just as an intricate of a fate, of destiny, because of course, so I told you this very beautiful image that you see here, which is the quintessence, and I will tell you why, of Caravaggio's art. was stolen. So this is probably the last picture that was taken of a work of art that used to be kept in a church in Sicily, in Palermo. And this was stolen by the mafia in the 1970s and was never to be found again. So to this day, investigators are still wondering who took the picture. Some mobsters witnessed it was later destroyed, but we still don't know what happened to this beautiful, beautiful painting. So Caravaggio was born in Lombardy. He studied for the first few years of his life in Milan. Then he eventually moved to Rome. And what you see here is the typical influence that is he got from the Flemish painters living in Rome. So in the 1590s, Caravaggio was in Rome. He was, of course, a genius, and he was interested in mannerism, but also was looking at what his Flemish colleagues were doing, and he learned how to paint using darkness and light in a very theatrical way. And a contemporary of his tells us, there is a very precise account. He tells us Caravaggio would paint in a dark room with just one very tiny source of light to obtain the most dramatic and most, let's say, striking contrast between darkness and light. So this is a typical image of his, very brutal in some way, naturalism, very, as you can see, this is, so once again, a baby Jesus is lying on a haystack. Mary is a woman from the lower classes. This caused Caravaggio, he always caused quite a stir. So he once used Mary, a model, a corpse of a drowned woman who had drowned in Rome, to depict, as an inspiration, to depict the dead body of the Virgin. So this, of course, always caused, remember, we're in the late 1500s, early 1600s, this was totally groundbreaking and, let's say, unorthodox in a way. So there is very striking naturalism, and of course, as I told you, light and darkness, and very, very theatrical elements, such as the angel. The light is very, as I said, theater-like or movie-like, and of course, this attention for the smallest details, the wrinkles. In some of his paintings, the characters even have dirty feet. So there's very, let's say, very radical naturalism. But once again, the iconography is very, very traditional. So we still find the ox and the ass that we saw in early Christian elements. Saint Bridget comes into play again with the adoration, but this is Caravaggio. Of course, the Nativity in Italy plays a special role around Christmas time, because to this day it's very common for Italian households to host a creche. So 3D version of a nativity. This is an element which really is part of any Italian child's childhood. I have childhood memories of picking moss, gathering moss with my dad in the woods, and then using his very old papier-mâché statues, little statuettes. So this is really a traditional element, but the creche, and if you look it up, you can find, I mean, you could even buy your own creche on eBay or Amazon probably, but, or if you want a traditional Naples is the place to go. But the really interesting thing I wanted to show you, that the creche, so something that is very contemporary, even in a sense, that is still a part of our lives today, has very ancient roots. So what I chose as the second to last image I chose to show you today is an image. These are sculptures that can be found in Varallo, so not far from where I live, and you're all invited to come and visit whenever you want, to when this crazy period will eventually be over and we will be able to fly and travel again, hopefully soon, around uh, around northwestern Italy. There is a set of 9 very special places which are called holy mountains or sacred mountains. And these were places, the picture you see here is an image that is taken from a place from the first holy mountain, the sacred mountain that was created in Varallo. So when I tell you about social history and religious history, so a very special role, a very prominent role was played by orders, by monks. And when it comes to the creche and to the images that were to be connected to daily life, a very crucial role was played by Franciscan. So even imagine that to this day, Franciscans are the guardians of the holiest place of Christianity in the Holy Land. And the holy mountain in Varallo was created by a Franciscan who had been to the Holy Land, had come back to northern Italy, and this was the late 1400s, in a time where it was not that easy to be a pilgrim to the Holy Land. It took a lot of time. It was very dangerous, especially because in those days you had the Ottoman Empire that was expanding very quickly, very rapidly. Of course, they were all afraid of the Turks, that had a reputation for being especially violent and especially dangerous for the pilgrims. So this friar, this Franciscan friar, basically said, let's try to make a copy, a precise copy of the Holy Land. Let's pretend Valsesia is Palestine, and let's have a copy of the holiest place of Christianity. And he did. So he did make copies. The first chapels that you can still see today that date back to the 1490s really are precise copies of the holy places in the Holy Land. And in this case, Bethlehem. So they recreated the cave where baby Jesus was born, so where the nativity took place. And inside the chapels, what you find is statues. And this is a very beautiful picture that was taken right after the latest restoration works. What they did is they even restored the wigs. So each of these statues that date back to the late 1490s or early 1500s, they have actual hair to make them even more lifelike. And what you see here, of course, is a bit of a creche told for pilgrims in a very simple yet let's say efficient, good way. So you would go home with a very clear message in your head. And it's by no accident that in this case, as I told you, the founder was Franciscan, because it was Saint Francis who brought to the Western world, to Italy, to Umbria, his region of origin, in the late 1200s. He basically imported the idea of having an actual nativity played out by characters. So a creche, the very first example was set up by Saint Francis, because of course nativities had a very played a very important role in theology and preaching, and having them played out by actors was of course something that was totally wonderful when it came to spreading, to teaching a message. And of course this was just let's say a small inventory of the nativity scenes I could think of. I hope I gave you a bit, as I said, a bit of an idea of the theology and the images behind it. And of course, the last, you could really spend 10 hours telling people, spectators, and my pupils, and etc., about nativities. But of course, I had to make a choice. Well, so I told you that let's say the heyday of nativities was surely between the early Christian and the early Christian times and the early Renaissance. With Counter-Reformation, as I told you, the set of images was kind of impoverished to make room for a more strict and orthodox theological message. And let's say that the very strict images basically accompany you throughout the 1600s and 1700s in some ways. So you don't find elements such as the midwives anymore. So you basically find the adoration of the shepherds, and the adoration of the Magi, and of course the adoration of the child with Saint Bridget, the ass and the ox. But you really are, let's say, in a whole different. They use a whole different lexicon compared to the early images we saw. But of course, the nativity is an element that's ever present, that's always present in art. And you can always, of course, you can find examples that are basically contemporary to us. I especially like this image by Chagall. And so this dates back to 1941. Of course, Chagall pays homage to his Jewish roots as well here. As you can see, there's a mention of Hanukkah. But of course, look at how close this image is to the images we saw of the Virgin. So you have, in reality, he's doing something totally, let's say, innovative. Of course, he has his trademark flying characters. Of course, a Jewish element in the characters as well. But of course, he's going back to tradition, but combining the two most common elements, such as crucifixion, which are crucifixion and a very curious take on nativity. So I hope I didn't kill anyone. Ilya, are the participants still there?
Yes, certainly.
Did you like it? Was it
Yes, very much. Well,
theologically?
thank you, very, very enlightening. I'll just ask people to allow to turn their microphones on. I think I muted you by accident as well. Elena, yep, thank you very much. So, dear friends, if you have any questions for Elena, please, you're most welcome to ask. Elena, I had a question. What's very fascinating to me about this nativity sets. I knew they're prominent, very much so, in particular in Germanic land. In Italy, do these particular nativity sets typical in Lombardy or all throughout? Is there anything that in northern
All
Italy?
throughout, all throughout.
All throughout.
We really had very beautiful, even wooden sets in the 1300s and 1400s in churches throughout Italy, or terracotta. It was either wood or terracotta, depending on the region. But then that too it's really hard to find some nowadays because they were basically eliminated during Counter-Reformation times. So, of course, what they did during Counter-Reformation was to get rid of anything that could be distracting. So you basically had many more altars inside the churches, many more decorations, and a lot of that was, they got rid of it because there was an attempt to go back to a very orderly liturgical space that wouldn't leave no room for distraction. Because, of course, what you had in those very first years of Counter Reformation was the awareness that Luther basically started out as a Christian monk, Catholic monk, and reading the gospel gave a totally different interpretation of a passage of the gospel. And that's where the trouble started for the Vatican and for Rome. So basically, anything that could be misunderstood, could be distracting, was basically eliminated. But we had sets. That's part of our history, and we do have sets even today in many churches. In Novara, they set up. I will look for the picture maybe so I can share it. They set up a nativity set in the baptistry this year.
I'm just always under the impression that it's more would be tradition of Lombardy and more a tradition of the or a tradition of semi-Germanic influence, so to say, or not necessarily.
Not necessarily, no. Central Italy, as I said, because of Saint Francis, and also Naples for Baroque sets is very renowned. Yeah. So and often we had brotherhoods or groups of people reenacting the main. So it was actually not only statues, but of course throughout the Middle Ages and in the first part of the Renaissance, we had sacred plays as well, which were, and of course, they were very common and very much loved, and they were a way of preaching and teaching the public something sacred without, of course, Mass was recited in Latin. So you're basically cut out of the whole deal. But then through sacred theater, you really got a glimpse of it all.
Okay. Well, dear friends, if you have any questions for Elena, please, now it's time to ask. Just unmute yourself because you're all muted, and you can turn your cameras on and microphones and such if you'd like to participate in the discussion. I really appreciate your inclusion of frescoes from Castel Serpio. There's some of my favorite ones. Not deviating too far from the subject, I wanted to ask you about that if you read something. They called semi-Byzantine, or drawn under the Byzantine influence, so to say. But I'm thinking that they preserve the traces of very early Roman art, of classical antiquity, much more so than that of Byzantium. Not to say that there is much of contemporary art from Byzantium left.
Yeah.
You know, of course, because the period of iconoclasm and general state of preservation. Could you comment on that at all, if you know anything about it?
Well, I think it's also, I think what you say is also because of the technique, which is really rapid brushstrokes, frescoes obtained through rapid brushstrokes. And the thing is, it's really difficult for historians to figure out who the artist was. He's known by the name of Maestro di Castelsepio, so the Castelsepio master. And the thing is, it's really intricate at times. So, for example, to trace all the contacts in this area in Oleggio, there is a church which they found some scribbles and some even Greek dialect writings. So it's a Greek dialect from southern Italy. So then they figured a local bishop had gone as an ambassador to Constantinople, had then traveled to southern Italy, and probably what happened, he hired some artists from southern Italy to travel north with him. But it's really difficult to trace these contacts. So, especially if you compare the catacombs frescoes and Castelsepio, you really do see the same technique, very rapid and very, let's say, liquid color, not very thick. So I'm sure there is some classical background to it as well. Yeah, but the iconography is mostly Byzantine with,
Subject
Marian
matters, more or less.
Hmm?
Subject matters. Subject
Yeah,
matters.
yeah. The iconography, yes, the subjects, the topics are very Eastern, so to say.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, Natalie has her camera on. Do you have a question to ask?
Yes, I do. Buonasera. Thank you so much for
Natalie?
this. Yeah, thank you so much for this talk. It was really fascinating and interesting.
Thank you.
I took a lot of notes on it. I really loved how you talked about the iconography and symbolism, especially of like the ox and the donkey like showing up each and every time. I mean, that's just really fascinating. I wanted to ask you, in light of your understanding of these Byzantine and Renaissance nativity scenes, what you thought of the most recent nativity scene in the Vatican. I don't know if you've seen that.
Yeah, that created quite a stir. Maybe Ilya, you can look it up and that it's kind of Star Wars like in a way.
Yeah, I saw it. I saw it.
Yes. So maybe somebody didn't see it. So that was that created quite a stir. Of course, it's been, we have. So next time you come to Italy, if you watch the news, you will see that every day, at least 3 times a day in the news, we get the Pope. And, there is, of course, a very strong presence, and it's become more and more, let's say, relevant since Pope Francis came. So he's really, let's say, a person, a presence we really do talk about a lot. And sometimes he's criticized for being excessive modern, so to say. So he's, it's an interesting time, I think, for the Vatican. What do you say, Ilya? But so this, I think, I don't know. So, of course, this was very, very modern. Never had I seen such a nativity scene. It was made by students of an art school in Abruzzo. So there is a tradition for terracotta works and crafts. I have to say, I'm kind of old school in a way. I liked parts of it, but for example, the angel, I didn't like it very much. I would isolate some of the parts, and some parts were okay. But I don't think the public was ready for such. So we went from, I think, a nativity scene that dated back to the 1980s, which was as traditional as one can get. And then you have this totally new and unprecedented image. And it's I think what was not clear from the start was that this basically has its roots in traditional popular culture in Abruzzo and popular crafts in Abruzzo. And so, yeah, it caused a stir. But my opinion is some parts are interesting, but yeah, not, let's say, not my favorite nativity scene in
Right.
the world. But
Right. Yeah, it's
what do you think,
definitely
Natalie? Yes, it is
um
ceramics. Ceramics. Yes,
interesting. Yeah,
ceramics.
I do think it's very strange. I think that it's a very different kind of nativity scene. I think it could also have its roots in Byzantine art. Just very little influence. Especially, it's not in this picture, but there's a figure of an executioner behind the astronaut. On the, I think if you're looking at it straight on, it's on the far left.
Uh-huh.
And I think we were talking about this a few weeks ago with my family. We were talking about how it's like an Etruscan sort of style, like an Etruscan
Uh-huh.
executioner. And I'm looking at Mary right now, Mary and her mantle. That's very, I think her mantle is very typical of those Theotokos images that you mentioned.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, and yeah, and also how, it's how the angel is very stiff and frontal. That's very, kind of like Eastern style, Byzantine style, very, not much movement when it comes to the angel. And yeah,
mhm.
I once tried, I have a funny story. A few years back, I think a decade ago, I came home with a nativity with a crash by Alessi, and it was like in an egg-shaped cave, and the characters looked like a cartoon, straight out of a cartoon. And my parents thought it was crazy. I had to put it back into the box, and it was never to be seen again. I don't think my mom threw it out, but it was totally it was a total disaster, a total failure. I'll I will show you then. I'll try to find it and I'll share it with you. Just a second. But it's interesting because, of course, every now and then they try to make something more modern. Uh, let's see if I find it. I don't know if it was a success. It wasn't at my house. Um, let's see. If I find it, it was like a very funny and ironic uh, crash, and but they didn't like it. Oh, it's even on Amazon still. Huh.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so it's maybe it was a success. I don't know. I just thought it was kind of uh, trying to copy it. Okay, let's see if I can share it. If I get to share it, let's see. Do I? Wait. I need to save it then. Sorry. Not that good with technology. I'm old school. I like paper and pens and
Yeah, yeah, I definitely
okay.
understand.
Wait. Okay, salve immagine. I should have it now. Let's see. Let's try again. So maybe? Yes. So this was very modern. See, it's like cartoon-like. I thought it was kind of funny. I especially liked Mary with a heart, but nobody liked it. And everybody thought it was hideous, and I had to put it away.
It does look like something like children would play with, like my siblings and I would play with when we were little. It does look like a little playset cartoon.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but to say every now and then there is some modernity that they try to, take into the nativity scene market, but it's, or in the Vatican, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's very interesting.
They even have floating nativity scenes near Amalfi. We get all sorts of takes and versions.
Yeah, I think I saw one that one year. I didn't see it myself personally, but I saw pictures of it. A nativity entirely made out of sand.
Yeah.
That looked really cool. So, do you know much about the process of choosing or creating the nativities for the Vatican?
The
That is,
selection.
mhm.
I don't know.
Is there any significance in the depiction of the nativities that they choose, or in the way they choose to
So
depict them?
I don't know why they chose this one. I kind of read the debate behind it, but I can look into it. There must be a committee, so it's really a big deal to have a big tree every year that is cut and taken. It's really a big deal, it's like the Christmas spirit. And let's see, maybe I can find something of the criteria, about the criteria. I'm sure there is a committee deciding. But I thought it was nice this year they had students, art school students, doing it, making it. And I thought it must have been heartbreaking for them to be, criticized so harshly. Let's say.
That's true. Yeah, that's very
I
true.
remember last year what they did. So I remember reading something about the Vatican going eco-friendly since maybe 2018 and removing plastic from so they chose not to have plastic, I think a couple of years ago. I have to find out. I have no, but let's see.
Yeah, of course. I was just curious.
But maybe I
Like,
can, if I find anything about it, the process of the selection process, I can send it to Ilya, and then he can send it to you.
yeah, I was just curious about like what your take was on both this year's nativity and the Vatican nativities in general. As an art historian, like,
Mhm.
how do you see it differently, or how do you see those references back to the same symbolism and typography that you mentioned in your talk?
Yeah, I think it's nice that it basically hasn't changed much. I think that's, so the style may change, but the essence is still. I enjoy seeing, the square. Of course, I won't be able to go to Rome this Christmas, but I was once in Rome during Christmas time. It's really fascinating, and you kind of have the heart of Christianity with this huge pine tree and all the lights and the nativity. I think that's the good side of tradition, let's say, in the Vatican. There's some, good and bad sides at times, but this is a very good side to tradition.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I think we do have a question. Rossi, please.
I do have a comment about the nativity scene in the Vatican. It came from an area, where the school is. It came from an area that had been hit very hard with like 4 earthquakes.
Yeah.
And it had been suffering terribly. And then the COVID hit, and it got hit especially hard. And I think they were trying to uplift that area for something good that they have, the school and the art.
Yeah, I think so. And it's like, I think it was also an occasion to showcase. So the town is Castelli, and it has been a very important town for ceramics since the late Middle Ages. So I think it was an occasion to showcase how tradition can live on for so many centuries and be reinterpreted. That's what I liked about it. And of course, like you mentioned, it's an era that was hit by, we had two very hard earthquakes in the last few years, and this was the worst one. And to this day, there are many areas which have not been rebuilt. So there's whole towns who are in ruins, that are in ruins. And I think you made a right point. It's really creating a good occasion for the school and for the territory it's in. And that's why I say it, I think it was really inappropriate to have such harsh criticism. Criticism can be constructive as well, and taste is so subjective. So maybe they could have been kinder. This is my opinion. Journalists and people, the public, could have been kinder at times.
Well, I don't think they necessarily targeted in their criticism the people who produce the imagery, but just the whole idea to put that type of imagery.
Yeah. Maybe the Vatican should have seen it coming. And the average comment was like, "Oh no, a crazy year, we get a crazy nativity scene." That was like the average comment, because of course there has been so much turmoil. And
excellent. Dear friends, any more questions? It's getting late in Italy, so
oh, it's okay.
okay, so we just don't want to abuse your kindness. So if anybody have any questions, please ask. If not, Elena, thank you so much. And I'm not catching you on your word, but if you'd be willing to repeat, not to repeat actually, but to meet again on a different subject, I would really appreciate it. We'll be in touch.
Anytime. This is such a, it's such a blessing for me to get to talk about art, and it's really good for me to, and I think it's connecting to the other side of the world. We met in actual guided tours. We were in person, and this is keeping the job I love alive in a way, and connecting to people I maybe would never get the chance to meet in any other occasions. So I think this was a wonderful occasion.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Grazie
you.
mille, and thank you everybody for participating, and we'll be posting announcements about the upcoming tours, and we hope to stay in touch with all. Please stay healthy and well and blessed. And if I won't see you before the Nativity, blessed Nativity to all, and Happy New Year, but we'll definitely be in touch.
Yes. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Buon Natale.
Buon Natale. And I'm going to post the video recording of this conversation on our YouTube channel, and of course I'll post it on Facebook as well, and I'll link it to your profile, Elena, as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm kind of shy when it comes to videos, but
no, it's perfect. Thank you very much, dear.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Grazie.
Bye bye.
Grazie a voi.